I think if we look at central bank policy, if central banks are acting together, if they're acting in unison, then that gives some support to markets and maybe reduces volatility. Once you start to see a dispersion in terms of the timing of interest rate cuts or the degree to which interest rates may change, that may lead to slightly greater volatility. Traditionally, if we look at interest rate reductions would support, they would help the smaller company sector. If we look at what has driven markets over the last 18 months or so, certainly a number of those larger companies, the mega caps, have outperformed. If we look through 2024 and into 2025, I think it's very possible, indeed likely, that we see a broadening out of the market. As we look forward and we look to interest rates coming down, albeit not as fast as some may have anticipated, but we look at that resilience within the global economy, I think that does help support equities, and that does mean that we may well see further increases as we go through this particular year. I do believe that inflation is going to be higher over coming years than it was in the 2010s and the 2000s, where sub 2% was common. But do we believe we're going back up to the high single digit? Absolutely not. But that last fall from that 3 to 4% in the US down to 2%, I think is going to be difficult to achieve. Geopolitics continues to be a concern there. We look at wars in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and that can be destabilizing, can increase volatility. That undoubtedly is a risk as we move forward. If we look as well as geopolitics, I think we can look also at fiscal deficits around the world. If we look at deficits within Europe, around about 4% or so, in the US, 5 or 6% or so. Now, if interest rates are close to zero, the cost of servicing that debt is not necessarily that high. With interest rates at 5% or so, the cost of servicing that debt is much higher than it would otherwise be. So what we need to see over a period of time are those fiscal deficits starting to come down. But it's much easier to increase spending, reduce taxes, see those deficits go up, than to do the reverse from a political viewpoint. That in and of itself is a risk. Because if we look at many countries within Europe, their total deficit to GDP is around about 100%, a bit lower in Germany, but around about 100% in the US. And so the cost of servicing that debt is quite high. So I think that is a risk as we move forward. One other thing I would highlight as well. We've seen inflation come down from the high single digit to the 2, 3, 4%. If we were to see a resurgence in inflation, it could be for geopolitical reasons or other reasons, but if we were to see that start to increase and the threat of higher interest rates rather than lower interest rates, that would be a shock for markets which I do not believe would be taken well. So the three key risks there would be geopolitical, there would also be the fiscal deficits, and also were inflation to pick up, that could be a risk.